Pokémon just released its 6th main series game on the Nintendo Switch, Pokémon Legends EA. This may well be the last main series Pokémon game to come out on the original Switch as we move into the era of the Switch 2. In fact, the Switch 2 versions of ZA and Scarlet and Violet made massive performance improvements on the Switch 1 versions already, but now, Switch 2 exclusivity in the development process should mean a further advancement in the technical quality of Pokémon games. So it's a great time to reflect on the first home console era of Pokémon's main series. For over 2 decades, Pokémon were master developers of the handheld systems, from the Game Boy all the way through to the 3DS, but it's been an awkward transition to the Switch, with fun games that advanced the series' mechanics overall, but games that are clearly not at the technical level of peers in the same space. And that begs the question, how are Pokémon going to handle the next era, the Switch 2 era, where the next 4 or 5 main series games are going to land? Well, there is one more thing we have to consider, unfortunately, and that is a massive 2-part Teraleak that occurred throughout 2024 and 2025, which seems to have revealed the entire next 5-year scope of main series releases all the way through to 2030. The latest leak in October came complete with screenshots of working versions of unrevealed games, notes from internal pitches, and overall a massive insight into the entire strategy of Pokémon games for the foreseeable future. Leaks, in my view, are truly always a shame for everyone involved, the fans and developers alike. I come from a pre-social media era where to find anything out about a game, you had to actually play the game, whether it's story beats, hidden Pokémon, or just the little secrets and references that Gamefreak always put in their games. The world of Pokémon had discoveries waiting for you that just hit so much harder when they weren't leaked and spread all over the internet ahead of time. And whilst it's a shame that we can't always feel those emotions anymore unless we actively avoid all the leaked details, there is perhaps a positive side to the leaks too. They give us a chance to digest and rationalize the plans of the company and explore what still stands and what might have changed. It then might also help Gamefreak to adapt accordingly. But there's another thing to consider about the leak, and that's quite simply, did it truly reveal everything? Or is the data just a snapshot in time from the original breach in 2024? Having thought about this from the Pokémon company's perspective, I think this latest Teraleak almost certainly has not revealed absolutely everything there is to know. And with the evidence we have, it actually gives us an insight into how quickly and drastically internal plans can change. So in today's video, we're going to use the power of logic to explore what may have been missing from the Teraleak and how the Pokémon company's plans might have changed. Hit the subscribe button if you enjoyed today's video, and of course, here's your spoiler warning for both the Teraleak and Legends EA. Now, I want to be clear, I absolutely think the gist of the Teraleak was correct in terms of the projects that it laid out. The next 2 projects, I feel, will be Generation 10 in 2026, a DLC for that game in 2027, and Legends Galar in 2028. This is clear through the thematic hints in ZA, like the Infinite Royale in the post-game of ZA serving as a perfect subtle teaser for the leaked theme of Infinity in Gen 10. Plus, there are many major hints and references to Galar throughout Legends EA, like AZ referencing the Darkest Day in his final letter, and the inclusion of Galar's national dish in that croissant curry monstrosity that Team MZ ended up eating throughout the game. And there are plenty more Galar references too. However, here's the crucial reason I don't think we have the full picture of their plans. Firstly, the leak primarily affected Gamefreak specifically, meaning details of any planned games from Pokémon Works, ILCA, or any other associated studios would not be held by Gamefreak. Secondly, the Teraleak did also reveal that the original plan for Legends EA was a totally different concept. It was meant to be Legends Johto. The Teraleak provides concept art and even the original scheduled release dates for Legends Johto lining up with the Gen 2 anniversary in 2024. But at some stage, they pivoted to a city-exclusive experience in Kalos with Legends EA. And that's a major pivot that we don't necessarily know the explicit reasons for, but we can read between the lines. My best educated guess would be that it was a response to the poor Gen 9 engine and art direction in Scarlet and Violet, along with development limitations, meaning they couldn't design a full historic Johto to the level of quality they wanted. And so any work that had been done on Legends Johto was repurposed and became Kitakami. And eventually they came up with a new map for a contained city game in Lumio City about Mega Evolution that actually aligned more with the Gen 9 engine visually. With the backlash about the Gen 9 visuals, classic regions like Johto and Kanto could not have their reputations tarnished when those classic games are held in such high regard. It would seem Legends Johto might have become not only Kitakami, but also the beginning of another new project revealed in the leak, the basis of the 4-region MMO that is supposed to be in the works right now. All this chopping and changing shows us just how quickly major releases can totally change internally, and it shows us that they are constantly exploring ideas about other potential games and stories. So we understand that projects can change, and that could mean that the details about Gen 10, Legends Galar, and the MMO might change or become something else entirely. We also understand that anything not spearheaded by Gamefreak is not going to have been in the Teraleak anyway. So what major project could be missing? Well, any new additions to major spin-offs like Mystery Dungeon, Colosseum, Ranger, and Snap would almost definitely be missing from the leak. So any of those, or even any new spin-off series, could absolutely still be coming in the next 5 years. But spin-offs aside, I think the major missing piece of information is about classic Pokémon, and this is why. 2026 is the 30th anniversary of Pokémon. In 2016, during the 20th anniversary, Pokémon re-released Pokémon Red, Blue, and Yellow on the 3DS Virtual Console on Pokémon Day. And this project was orchestrated not by Gamefreak, but by the Pokémon company themselves, with Gamefreak taking a more supportive role rather than full development. At the time, this release was a major deal for Pokémon fans, providing us with a legitimate way to play the original games if we didn't have the old game cartridges or the older hardware. The Virtual Console releases went on to sell over 1.5 million copies, and the following year, Gold, Silver, and Crystal were released on the Virtual Console too. And while sales figures weren't specifically released, we do know that they topped the Virtual Console charts for a while, so we can imagine similar sales numbers. For a low-effort, simple republishing of the old classics, the Pokémon company would have made somewhere between $10 and $30 million, against a fraction of what it would have cost to put these already made games on the 3DS store and run a fairly cheap marketing campaign for them. And now, fast forward 10 years later to the era of the Switch and the Switch 2. That Virtual Console release has become unavailable to purchase since the 3DS eShop shut down in March 2023. So by the time Pokémon Day 2026 comes around, it will have been 3 years that fans have had no legitimate means to play Gens 1 to 3 without having the old cartridges, unless of course they already bought the games on their 3DS before the eShop closed. But I actually think it was smart on the Pokémon company's part to give us a period of time without being able to legitimately access those games. 1, to build up an appetite for them again, and 2, so as not to frustrate anyone who spent money buying all the games on the 3DS before the eShop shut down, only to immediately realize they didn't need to because they've suddenly become available on the Switch. But this time, I think a Classics release has far higher potential. But why? Well, the 3DS owner base was around 75 million, whereas the Switch and Switch 2 base is far bigger at a combined 165 million. So already the sales potential is over double on that fact alone. The company is also 10 years older, meaning it has 10 years worth of younger, newer fans in addition to the old ones, collectively all of which may be interested in the classic titles for different reasons. That's all well and good, but the Pokémon company will know that to actually get the best volume of sales they can, the release has to be bigger, smarter, and offer more features than a simple port like the 3DS did. The 3DS versions finally allowed us to access previously unavailable one-off events on our 3DS, like the Celebi Ilex Forest event in Pokémon Crystal. This event is something that was previously only available in Japan back on the Game Boy Color if you had a mobile adapter or got a lucky ticket at a one-off event back in 2000. The 3DS ports also allowed us to send our Pokémon from our save directly to Pokémon Bank, meaning we could finally take Pokémon from those original adventures to modern Pokémon games on the Switch by sending them on from Bank to Pokémon Home. Plus, any Pokémon transferred from the 3DS Virtual Console versions to Bank would have their hidden abilities, another great incentive to buy the games for collectors seeking hard to obtain Pokémon, those interested in competitive viability, or even just for casual players. So yes, there were some very cool functions that made the 3DS Virtual Console versions appealing to buy. But it was still relatively cheap to do, and that reflected in the relatively cheap prices, though it would still have been a strong earner for the Pokémon Company against fairly small logistical costs. I think 2026 is the perfect time, and almost the obvious time, to re-release the older games again for the Switch 1 and Switch 2. They don't need to make it Switch 1 or 2 exclusive either, due to the low processing power that Classics ports would require. So a simple Switch version should cover both console bases, or if they really wanted to, they could add some small features to a Switch 2 exclusive version of the game, but that could invite criticism, so it could be a risky move. But let's fast forward and consider what a Classics release might actually look like in 2026, bearing in mind Pokémon will want to achieve the biggest hype and sales potential possible. There are really two options here. One is to simply release the games through the Virtual Console, and the other is to release them bundled as an actual new Switch game. And which option they choose will be extremely important. Nintendo now have a subscription-based service for Switch Online that allows us access to the Virtual Console library. If you have Switch Online, which is about $20 per year, you can access the Game Boy and Game Boy Color Virtual Console, but you'd need the expansion pass, which costs an extra $30 to access the Game Boy Advance Virtual Console. This makes things a bit messy if they want to include the GBA games in this celebratory re-release. I definitely think they will go beyond just Gens 1 and 2 this time, so a Virtual Console release doesn't really make sense to me. So here's what I think would be the optimal choice for the Pokémon Company. A new sub-series, accessible to both Switch and Switch 2 players. This will be split into volumes 1, 2, and 3. Volume 1 would be released in 2026, Pokemon's actual 30th anniversary year, and it would contain all the games from Gens 1, 2, and 3, including remakes and third versions. So Volume 1 would have Red, Blue, and Yellow, Gold, Silver, and Crystal, Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, plus Fire Red and Leaf Green. Volume 2 would release sometime after that, maybe 12 or 18 months on. This would contain Gens 4 and 5, the DS era of games, Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, Heart Gold, Soul Silver, Black and White, and Black and White 2. And then Volume 3 would release deep into the Switch 2 era a further 12 or 18 months later, featuring all the 3DS games, X and Y, Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, Sun and Moon, and Ultra Sun and Moon. This way, Pokémon could justify a $40 or $50 price tag for each volume because you're getting so many games in one, spreading the releases and spreading the hype without overly extorting fans either. And it also allows full functionality with Pokémon Home, meaning your Pokémon aren't trapped in the Virtual Console. But here's the crucial point. Pokémon need some sort of extra functionality in each of the games to really sell this idea. Visual sliders like we see in Final Fantasy Tactics is a no-brainer for me, but also ROM hacks, randomizers, and nuzlockes are a massive part of the Pokémon community now, particularly for those who are older and for those of us who like a challenge. Radical Red is often cited as the best Pokémon experience for veteran players because of the sheer amount of customization, variety, continued updates, and the challenge element too. It's the perfect ROM hack of Fire Red and Leaf Green, and Pokémon will 100% be aware of its popularity among other ROM hacks. So in my view, the best way they can maximize sales potential and their reputation is to allow some sort of customization or editor mode too. This is a celebration of the franchise's history, honoring the past to celebrate what got the company to the point they're at now, and that includes fans of all skill levels and all ages. So a Classics release with actual options on how you play would be perfect. They just need to provide something both for casual players who want to relive the old classics just how they were, but they also need to provide a reason to have us keep coming back if they want to justify a higher price tag. Much like the Infinite Royale in Legend ZA's postgame, it would be so easy for them to let us unlock a randomizer or editor function for replayability, and just make it so that the randomized save files specifically from those modes do not have functionality with Pokémon Home. So that way we can't abuse the system and transfer, let's say, a Mewtwo that we found before the first gym, for example, to use in other playthroughs. And it's not just randomization features either. Simple things like allowing each classic Pokémon game to have Wi-Fi functionality would be incredible, allowing us to trade with other people across the world and locally, and allowing us to relive the competitive battling metas of Gens 1, 2, 3, and so on. In my view, this would be far more substantial and generate far more excitement than simply eventually dumping the games on the Virtual Console again, especially as there is famously no connectivity between the Virtual Console apps and Pokémon Home, for example. And I'm pretty sure the same thing will happen when Colosseum and XD Gale of Darkness release at some point. But this Classics project is something I'm so convinced will not be left out in some capacity in the 30th anniversary year, and therefore it's a major missing puzzle piece that would not have been in the Gamefreak Teraleak. So, revamped versions of old spin-offs, new sequels to old spin-offs, and entirely new spin-offs are all still on the cards for the next 5 years, as well as what I believe is the obvious and most logical celebratory release for 2026, a new classic Pokémon re-release with multiple volumes, gradually releasing over a period of 2 to 3 years as we settle into the Switch 2 lifecycle. But what do you think? Let me know all of your thoughts down below, and until next time, love you gang.